What is going on, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review Scream 7, and this review will be spoiler-free because, to be honest, I'm not entirely sure which returning cast members will be a surprise to people and which ones won't. Because if you go over to Wikipedia, everybody who returns is listed there, but I think some of these characters were a surprise for the Scream diehards because my audience was losing their goddamn mind. Not as much as the audience lost their mind at Scream 2, way back in the day, because for people who don't know, the original Scream in 1996 was a cultural phenomenon. I saw it several times in the theater, had the VHS cassette, letterbox, and all that stuff. And when Scream 2 came out, even though I didn't like the movie, it was one of the most electric screenings that I've ever attended because it was filled to the brim with teenage girls who wanted to scream, and that's all they did for the entire movie. They fucking screamed their hearts out. Tonight, my crowd wasn't that intense, but they were still pretty goddamn intense. I would say my theater was nearly sold out, and they were talking to the screen, and they were cheering, and they were laughing. And anytime a familiar face from the good old days of the franchise returned in any way, shape, or form, either, whether it makes sense or not, they were freaking out and loving it. It blows my mind just how big and just how excited the Scream fan base remains after 30 years. And I think it's safe to say that in 2026, the great majority of the Scream diehards that are still out there, they like the franchise overall much more than I do. To be honest, I really only like Scream. I grew up as a Wes Craven junkie. I watched Nightmare on Elm Street over and over and over again as a kid, and then I would see things like Serpent and the Rainbow. I went to the theater to see The People Under the Stairs with a row full of middle schoolers, and I grew up on Wes Craven stuff, loved it to pieces. And when Scream came out, I could not believe just how fun and electric and exciting it was.
Well, I'm getting ready to watch a video.
Really? What?
Oh, just some scary movie.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
You never told me your name.
Why do you want to know my name?
I want to know who I'm looking at.
Even if it felt a little tame in comparison to a lot of the slasher movies that I grew up on, because I grew up in the 1980s, and most of the slasher movies in the 1980s, let's just say they were much more explicit than a lot of the slasher films from the 1990s, where they start, even though they weren't PG-13, they started to feel more PG-13, like that scene in the original Scream when Neve Campbell offers a PG-13 relationship to her fella and flashes him with her bra on. That's what slasher films started to resemble in the 90s.
Hey, Billy, would you settle for a PG-13 relationship?
What's that?
But no one could deny that Wes Craven, along with screenwriter Kevin Williamson, very successfully revived the slasher genre in the 1990s. And it seems like Kevin Williamson, the great majority of his talent remains intact, even if he's not quite as crisp and not quite as charming as a writer as he was back in the day, because he was mostly just a screenwriter. I mean, he wrote Scream. He wrote I Know What You Did Last Summer. He wrote The Faculty. I mean, in the late 90s, he was one of the kings of the horror genre, at least when it came to commercial success. But the reason he directed this recent one, I'll give you the short version of the drama, which I just got caught up on yesterday after Scream 6. Melissa Barrera and Jenna Ortega were booked to come back to do the next Scream movie alongside director Christopher Landon, but Melissa Barrera got fired for statements related to Israel and Palestine, and then Jenna Ortega was like, wait a second, this project seems like it's falling apart. She bailed, claiming scheduling conflicts and so on and so forth, and director Christopher Landon, he bailed on the sequel because he was getting death threats over the firing of Melissa Barrera. Apparently, it wasn't even his call to fire her, but he was getting the death threats all the same. So suddenly, the project, which still had all this momentum, needed to be substantially rewritten, and that included bringing back Neve Campbell, who famously was not part of Scream 6, which is mentioned in Scream 7 quite a bit. But she was paid apparently $7 million to come back and play the great, is it Sidney Prescott? Is that her full name? It's definitely Sidney, but yeah, Sidney Prescott, or now Sidney Prescott Evans, because she's happily remarried now. But they paid her $7 million to come back, and it looks like Paramount's gamble might have paid off. If my audience tonight is any indication, because I didn't go to like a cool like hipster theater or a cinephile theater, and New York's got plenty of those. I went to just a plain old, like boring vanilla AMC theater, saw it with just your average movie-going public. And it's the first time I've seen a crowd that excited in 2026. I've seen a lot of crummy movies in 2026, and I'm not going to tell you that Scream 7's a good movie, but it's certainly a fun movie. And I hate calling it a fun movie because usually people call a movie fun when they're trying to say they didn't really like it, but they're rooting for it. But it was fun. I was laughing. I laughed out loud several times, and I was enjoying seeing a lot of these familiar faces because, nostalgia is a weird, crazy thing. And my 90s nostalgia far exceeds my 80s nostalgia because I started high school in 1991, finished college in 1999. Like all my formative years were the 1990s. So anytime somebody makes a movie kind of tipping its hat to the 1990s, it's going to pull at my heartstrings. But what has me even more excited than the future of the Scream franchise, before the movie started, they played a couple different trailers. The first trailer that kind of made people wake up is the trailer for Passenger, which has a really good jump scare at the end of the trailer, and the theater just went fucking berserk. But then after that, they played the trailer for the new Scary Movie, I guess, continuation or extension. I don't know if it's 6 or 7 or whatever the case might be. I love Scary Movie. I've got 1, 2, and 3 on Blu-ray right here, but I've even got Scary Movie on fucking. I got, for whatever reason, I have 2 copies on DVD. This one's not even opened for some reason, but I still have it. I think Scary Movie, and to a lesser extent, Scary Movie 2, are 2 of the funniest movies of that era, and they do a brilliant job of paying homage to, but also making fun of Scream and I Know What You Did Last Summer. And if you put a gun to my head, I think the parts of Scary Movie that are making fun of Scream. That is my favorite version of Scream that I've ever seen. But the trailer they played tonight, once again, like with Scream 7, all the familiar faces are back, and I was cracking up, like, from start to finish. Maybe I'm a little bit biased, or maybe I'm a little bit already in the bag for the Scary Movie franchise because I love that first one so much. But the crowd seemed to be genuinely excited. So, yeah, to be honest, Scary Movie, the reboot or sequel or franchise extension, whatever you want to call it, might be my most anticipated movie of the year, and that includes Avengers Doomsday, because I miss comedy, and I miss raunchy comedy, and I miss dirty comedy so badly. And when it comes to that style of comedy, nobody's better than the fucking Wayans brothers. They were the kings of that kind of comedy once upon a time, and hopefully they will, have a triumphant return this summer.
I won't have anything to do with this. Shut up! Cindy, come on. We'll just pretend it never happened. Like the time we got drunk and we went down on each other.
In any case, we'll be talking a lot more about the Scary Movie franchise later this year. For the time being, let's stay focused on Scream 7 and the return of Kevin Williamson. Quick question, and I should have looked this up ahead of time. How many Scream screenplays did he write? I know he always got credit because he came up with the characters, but how many actual screenplays did he write? Because I keep saying on IMDb based on characters created by, so I'm not entirely sure how actively he was involved with Scream 2 and all the subsequent movies, but now he's back as a director because basically when the previous director and the previous stars fell out of the project, they were scrambling to kind of reinvent the movie. So they apparently paid Kevin Williamson $500,000 to quickly rewrite Scream 7 and juggle all the characters and change the story, etc. and so forth. But I think for a movie that's basically like a hatchet job, where it's like, oh my God, the project's falling to pieces, we've lost our leads, we've lost our director, we got to completely reinvent it. I have to say they were largely successful. I mean, once again, the second half, it starts to kind of run out of gas and you just start to realize, okay, I can kind of see how this is going to be kind of a paint-by-numbers slasher movie from here on out. But for the first half, it kept me on my toes, and I was more or less kind of bewildered as to where it might be going. And I think much like how Kevin Williamson was very savvy about horror movies in the 1990s, he's incorporating a lot more modern stuff. Like, there's a character in this movie who's obsessed with true crime podcasts. And the extension of I Know What You Did Last Summer last year had yet another character who's obsessed with true crime podcasts. So it's not entirely original, but it makes sense that if you want to have a character like that who in the 90s would have been a horror junkie, probably now they would be a true crime podcast aficionado. But if you just want the gist of the story, here's what they have written over on IMDb. When a new Ghostface killer emerges in the town where Sidney Prescott has built a new life, her darkest fears are realized as her daughter becomes the next target. And her daughter is played by Isabel May. She's playing a character, Tatum Evans. And I would say if you wanted to hurl one major criticism at this movie, said Isabel May is not going to be able to carry the burden of the franchise moving forward. And you can tell they're trying to kind of like tee her up as the future star of the franchise. And I don't know if her character was just underwritten or maybe because she's the star of a movie that she's not as like powerful as the original Scream, but you cannot kind of pass. It's very hard to pass the baton or the torch to another generation, period, and lose the original stars because Neve Campbell, there's something about her in the 1990s and still in the present day, she's just as all-American as apple pie. And in the late 90s, she was just everywhere. I mean, I felt like she just, like, for a brief shining moment became this massive celebrity, and she was, like, hooking up with Denise Richards and Wild Things and doing all this crazy shit. But I have a lot of very fond memories of Neve Campbell in the late 90s. But she just crushed it in Scream. And because Scream was so good, people will always associate her with Scream. But I think when it comes to the new generation of fans, and there's definitely a generation gap, yeah, Scream 5 and 6 were successfully kind of building a new fan base for a new generation of characters. But in any case, they very much have gone back to basics. Everything about this movie just feels like, if anything, it almost kind of ignores like 2 through 5 for the most part, and really stays focused on plot details and plot ingredients from the first movie, which is fine for me because that's the only one that I really remember because I've seen it so many fucking times. But getting back to Isabel May and possibly passing the baton or passing the torch to a new generation, I think one of the main problems with her character is that they're trying to kind of echo or repeat too many beats of the character that Sidney went through in the original Scream 30 years ago. And Isabel May is an actress. She's 25 years old, and we're expected to believe that she's this kind of virginal, innocent princess who's still, like, having like relationship problems with her boyfriend and that sort of thing. I'm like, I'm sorry, you've aged out of playing the virginal high school student and so on and so forth. I know that Hollywood loves to like cast people that are 50 as high school students, but I think at this point, teenagers need to look like teenagers if you're going to believe that they are actually fucking teenagers. Or I shouldn't, maybe not. Or in this case, not fucking teenagers, because that's kind of a major plot detail early on that they just completely abandon and forget about later in the movie. But that obviously was a major plot detail in the original Scream back in 1996, because one of the big tropes of slasher movies in the late 70s and throughout the 1980s, if you were a virgin, there was a good chance you might survive to the closing credits. But if you were slutting it up and getting it on, well then most likely you were going to have to pay a heavy toll. And John Carpenter on many occasions has apologized for basically killing the sexual revolution. He said when he made Halloween, it was never his intention to kill the sexual revolution by basically punishing girls on screen who are more sexually libidinous, but it started a trend. And from that point on, whether it was Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street or whatever the case might be, if you like to get it on, well then you most likely were going to get your throat cut in the not so distant future. But if I had to zero in on and place my finger on precisely what makes Scream 7 work, or at least what appeared to make it work so well from our crowd tonight, it's starting to feel a little bit like the world of professional wrestling, with like heel turns and baby faces and dramatic comebacks and that sort of thing. But like they've abandoned all pretense of being a horror franchise. There's not a single scene in the entire movie where like, oh my god, like what's going to happen? Because anytime one of the Ghostface killers shows up, it immediately turns into professional wrestling. Girls are like throwing like outside crescent spin kicks and like smashing chairs over them. Like whatever happened to people running from the bad guy? Because every single time he shows up, people just start beating the shit out of him. I'm like, well then just keep kicking his ass and he will die and you don't have to like keep running and worrying about him. But there were so many kind of obvious like twists and turns that you could kind of see coming where, the action would resume again, or you think someone's dead and they pop back up. But yeah, I think the world of professional wrestling is a much closer kind of a kindred spirit to Scream, or at least Scream 7, than Scream 1. Because Scream 1, while it wasn't entirely as scary as something like The Last House on the Left, Wes Craven's most disturbing movie. And once again, if you've only seen Scream, you're not remotely prepared for the original Last House on the Left, which is basically like almost like a snuff movie in a lot of ways, where it's like a little too disturbing, even for diehard horror fanatics who love movies from the 1970s. But I feel like when Wes Craven made A Nightmare on Elm Street in the 1980s, he really found his sweet spot where it was still fun and entertaining, but at times gruesome and horrifying. And I was just young enough when I saw A Nightmare on Elm Street where for about a month, like my hands were shaking and I was having trouble sleeping. And anytime like my cassette would stop in my little boombox, I would I would get startled. It really got under my skin and really fucked me up. So by the time we got to Scream, it just felt like a rock concert. We have all these sexy young teens, like Rose McGowan was looking like an absolute goddess back then. But it was all about like how many hot young actors can we line up and how many people can we make you suspect might be the killer. But the kills in that movie were almost bloodless in a lot of respects, and basically they were there for thrills as opposed to horror. Whereas Last House on the Left is a full-blown horror movie. But now Scream 7, yeah, it's professional wrestling. But if you like professional wrestling, well then you probably will enjoy Scream 7. But if I were to offer a few criticisms of Scream 7, it's a little on the long side, and it's not technically that much longer than the original Scream. The original Scream was 1 hour and 51 minutes, and this new one's 1 hour 54, but the original Scream was fucking fantastic. Wes Craven's a much better director than Kevin Williamson. But, yeah, if this movie had managed to shave 10 or 15 minutes off, I wouldn't have complained, just because once again it starts to run out of gas in the second half, but also one too many characters, because they're juggling a lot of characters from the recent Scream movies as well as bringing back a lot of characters from the original Scream movies. And at a certain point you're just like, maybe the head count's a little bit too big and maybe I'll need to accelerate your timetable in terms of getting a few of them off the chessboard, because there's too many characters to keep track of, where the plot really starts to feel like it's kind of like stuck in the mud, or it's kind of inert because it's having to keep track of so many different characters. I mean, just look at the movie poster here. You can tell there's way too many floating heads on this poster. It's like an Avengers Assemble kind of a reunion movie in a lot of ways. But the most obvious criticism from my point of view is that the movie's just not scary at all. Like, it's not even trying to be scary, so maybe I shouldn't criticize it for not being what it's not trying to be. But we've seen a lot of horror movies recently where they're gory and they're bloody, but they're not remotely scary. But who knows, maybe a lot of modern Scream fans, like basically the fans who have become fans of the franchise in the post-Wes Craven era, maybe they'll feel differently. Maybe the Scream 7's precisely what they're looking for, because according to all the experts over at the entertainment trades like Variety and Deadline and whatnot, this movie's anticipated to have a $45 to $50 million opening weekend, and it could be even bigger depending upon word of mouth. But the movie only cost $45 million to make, so I think Paramount is about to have a massive weekend in terms of very positive headlines. And the reason I just made that Freudian slip about Warner Brothers is I just saw the news as I came in from the movie that Netflix has withdrawn its bid to acquire Warner Brothers, and so it looks like, assuming it passes all the regulatory what have you, that Paramount Skydance will acquire and merge with Warner Brothers. And I imagine Scream 7 is going to be a harbinger of things to come, where they're going to just press down on the gas pedal and say, what every single legacy franchise that we have at Paramount or Warner Brothers, we're going to bring back all the old stars, and we're just going to try to make a lot of short-term gains, because I do regard these sequels to legacy franchises as short-term gains, because what you're not doing is building new franchises. Like, if you're nostalgic about the 90s now, 30 years later, what are kids who are 19 now going to be nostalgic about 30 years from now when they're in their late 40s? Because I feel like you need franchises that are as new and as exciting and as electric as Scream was when it first hit the screen in 1996. So I do worry about the Hollywood's originality crisis. At a certain point, all the actors who were stars in the 80s and 90s, at a certain point, they will move on to movie star heaven and whatnot, and they will not be around for any more legacy sequels. And so I do think you need to build new franchises. But I'm about to contradict myself, because I am very excited for Scary Movie. But I feel like comedy franchises are a very different thing from like superhero franchises or sci-fi or horror or whatever the case may be. Or who knows, maybe I'm just being a total hypocrite and I'm really excited to see Scary Movie. But yeah, Paramount, they're going to be thumping their chest. If they can have a number one movie in the theater while at the same time winning the bidding war for Warner Brothers, yeah, they're going to be dining out and having a very positive weekend. The question now is, what will they do with that momentum? Like, will they tap young screenwriters to build the next generation's great horror franchise? Because I feel like right now, at least, if you want to tell original stories, the safest place and the easiest place to do so is within the horror genre. But usually it's like A24 and Neon that are providing those opportunities, whereas the big studios love their horror franchises. Like, Sony's been doing like 28 years later and all that stuff. And, Warner Brothers brought back Final Destination, although Warner Brothers also had original horror with Sinners as well as Weapons. So, yeah, I'm very optimistic about the future of the horror genre. But we do need some new franchises that can be as exciting as A Nightmare on Elm Street, Friday the 13th, Halloween, etc. and so forth. And speaking of which, maybe now's the time, as good a time as any, to talk about my favorite slasher movies. Now, when it comes to slasher movies in particular, classic slasher movies, I feel like I'm in the Lucky Sperm Club, because I came along at precisely the right time to take advantage of the video store phenomenon of the 1980s, where suddenly, whether it was mom and pop video stores or big chains like Blockbuster, video stores were everywhere like fucking fast food restaurants. Like, we went from having no video stores to just thousands, and my family would drive it to the video store once or twice a week, and the adults would pick a movie, the kids would pick a movie, and a big pull back then was the horror section, where I would just walk down just gazing at the box art for all those VHS cassettes. And obviously the big franchises back then were, they drew me in because there'd be like a big row, and one of the earliest ones that I saw that I selected was Friday the 13th, the final chapter, which might still be my favorite slasher movie. Not my favorite horror movie at all, but my favorite slasher movie because it's the full package where it's got the kills, it's got the horror, it's got the great characters, but it also has all, the libidinous elements, the skinny dipping, the hookups and that sort of things. Like everything you want to see in a good slasher movie, it's all contained in it. So I feel like I got off to a really good start. But my first exposure to the slasher genre was Halloween on TV as a little kid, where I didn't even last more than like 10 or 20 minutes, and I was still just scarred for life. This would have been like 1981 or 1982, and just hearing that music and seeing the opening credits and then seeing the opening with Michael killing his sister and that sort of thing. I was just like, oh, mommy. It wrecked me. It destroyed me. But I didn't pick that. I just stumbled upon it on TV, whereas Friday the 13th, the final chapter, I selected it off the shelf, and it 100% delivered, and I just fucking loved it. But the big question always is, how broadly do you want to define the slasher genre? Because there are a lot of movies where I see people including them on their list. I'm like, that's just a straight up horror movie. But I'm a big fan of all the movies that kind of informed the slasher genre without actually being outright slasher movies. Like Mario Bava made a movie called Bay of Blood, where you can see individual scenes and individual kills in that movie. Like, oh my God, I saw that in Friday the 13th Part 2. Oh my God, I saw this and that. Like, it's amazing just how many scenes were lifted from it in later movies, like a decade later. Or a movie like Black Christmas. And of course, from the same guy who would later direct Christmas Story, he made like the best Christmas movie and the best Christmas horror movie. Although Terrifier 3 is a slasher movie and a pretty good Christmas slasher movie at that. But Black Christmas, I didn't discover it until like deep into my 30s or maybe even my 40s. But when I finally saw Black Christmas, there's one scene or one shot that is so terrifying. It felt like somebody was like reaching into my chest and like squeezing my heart. I was just like, oh, fuck me. I mean, I could not believe how mortifying it was. And that's all it takes for me to love a movie. So Black Christmas and Bay of Blood are definitely like the early kind of archetypes that helped inform the slasher genre. A lot of people include Psycho. I think Psycho, just its own beast. I guess that there's part of me, like part of my snobbery is that once a movie gets really good, I feel like it kind of transcends the slasher genre, which is kind of like a cheap, tawdry, disposable genre, which kids love, but at a certain point you kind of outgrow your obsession with it. So for me, Psycho transcends it. Even Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of, for me, transcends it. Like Kevin Williamson, who wrote and directed Scream 7, would probably disagree because he's got it on the marquee at the local movie theater throughout all of Scream 7. So he clearly loves the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. But that movie, it's got some slasher tropes, like, the final girl. And if it is a slasher movie, it's one of the great ones because no final girl has been more damaged psychologically and mentally, like more than the final girl of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where it's just like, she's never going to be right in the head ever again. It's just that shrill laughter that you hear. It's just you'll never forget it. And the first time I saw the movie, just kind of tore up my spinal cord and broke it in two. It's really fucking good. But if we're going to judge our favorite slasher movies by the number of times that we have watched the individual movie in question, A Nightmare on Elm Street, if it counts as a slasher movie, it's so supernatural. I don't know if it's like in a different category or not, but if it is a slasher movie, it's definitely the one that I've seen the most, and which just brings us full circle back to Scream and Wes Craven. Yeah, Wes Craven, he died way too young, but from the 1970s through the 1990s, he just had something in his bones where anytime he explored other genres, like the final product would be a little bit mixed. But over and over and over again, he managed to return to the well and make even like different kinds of horror movies that were absolutely extraordinary. But when A Nightmare on Elm Street came along, Freddy Krueger was the most popular like celebrity in North America or on the planet. He was fucking everywhere, and they were like making like a movie a year for so many years in a row, and it just was a life-changing experience watching that. And that is the movie where it really cemented my love for the horror genre. As much as I'd really loved Friday the 13th, the final chapter, it really was A Nightmare on Elm Street, the one that just kept me coming back. Where there were summer parties where we watched it, and it just, I was like making my own gloves. Like I had like tinfoil around like straws and a skater glove. I was like, yeah, come to Freddy and all that good stuff. In any case, so yeah, those are all my old school slasher favorites. And when the slasher genre changed in the 90s, thanks to Scream, once again, it got very teen friendly. They stayed R, but a lot of the blood and almost all the nudity just vanished overnight. And I feel like the slasher genre was never the same. But I'm old school, and I feel like my love of the slasher genre basically lasted from like age 9 to like 20. And so I just like, I'm obviously going to be partial to the ones that I watched as a young boy. In any case, just to wrap things up on Scream 7, a lot of the debate and a lot of the conversation I've seen surrounding the movie right now, especially from critics, is all surrounding Melissa Barrera and some people who are boycotting the movie and people criticizing Paramount and unsubscribe and blah, blah, blah. But the movie is entertaining. And if people are having a good time in a movie, it's very hard to convince them to remain like political and take a stand when there's a franchise that they love and they hear that the latest entry is good. So they might not advertise it on social media, but it wouldn't surprise me at all if we see this Sunday, oh, by the way, Scream 7 opened to $50 million in North America, which would be a huge opening for this franchise. So to be continued. I will be back for a box office breakdown on Sunday, which I'm looking forward to doing. And I'm obviously looking forward to having future conversations about Paramount's acquisition of Warner Brothers. But let me know what you think down in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider liking, subscribing, hitting that notification bell. I would greatly appreciate it. But I hope everybody has a great weekend at the movies. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.